Hey friends, thanks so much for checking out this video. My name's David. I'm a pastor in the Glenville area, the Glenville Methodist Church. If you're looking for a strong traditional Wesleyan Bible believing church, we'd love to have you worship with us. One of the cheat codes as a pastor is to tell somebody you want to interview them, and you get to talk to some very cool people that way. And I'm very pleased to talk to my friend, Dr. Reverend Leah Hidde Gregory. She is the president pro tem of the Mid-Texas Conference of the Global Methodist Church. After 30 years in the United Methodist Church, she became an elder in the Global Methodist Church in June of 2022. During her ministry, she served as a laywoman in the Oklahoma Conference and as a pastor in the North Texas and in the Central Texas Conference. She also served as a district superintendent in the Central Texas Conference. She recently spoke at Asbury Theological Seminary Chapel, where she gave a powerful testimony. I want to encourage everybody to go listen to that wherever you find your podcast. She has a heart and a passion for sharing the good news of Jesus Christ. She has spent much of her ministry in church revitalization, revival, and church growth. She's excited about the Global Methodist Church, the Orthodox Witness, and the global partnerships. She holds a doctorate in ministry and church leadership, leadership excellence from Wesley Theological in Washington, D.C., a master's of divinity from Perkins School of Theology, a bachelor's in psychology and sociology from Texas A&M Commerce, and she is married to her partner in ministry, Stan. They have two daughters who I believe were both married this past year, and a son who is a football star who bounced back from a knee injury this past football season and played this year. So we'll bring her in. Dr. Hidde Gregory, how have you been?
I've been great. It's an amazing season right now.
Tell me about your daughters. You've got them both married off. How was planning weddings and participating in them?
Well, I will tell you, my oldest daughter got married in November, and that was a blur because we were in disaffiliation talks and I was driving and I literally did hundreds of those talks. And so like trying to help her plan was a blur. My younger daughter just got married a few weeks ago, and I got to enjoy the planning of that one a little bit more. But both of them were beautiful weddings. I love both of my new son-in-laws. Now our family's a little bit bigger and it's great. And I keep saying, okay, it's been a year. Let's have a baby now because I'm ready for grandbabies. But my girls are not ready for grandbabies. So, all right, whatever.
I bet you're going to be a killer grandmother.
I
So
can't wait. I can't wait.
that's very cool.
Yeah.
So about a year ago, a little over a year ago, I reached out to you and we talked about the Global Methodist Church and some of your hopes for it. It is my most viewed video out of my ministry tutorials, out of my sermons on my YouTube page. You are the #1 viewed
Oh,
video
wow.
there. So,
That's a little scary.
well, I don't have the biggest audience quite yet, but I'm sure that'll continue to be a very popular one. So, it's been a whole year since we've really had a detailed conversation. What's been going on as the leader of annual conference in the Global Methodist Church? What have you seen happen?
There are moments. So, in Habakkuk 1:5, it says that I'm about to do a new thing. And if someone were to tell you what I was about to do, you wouldn't believe them. I think if I went back to my old self at the launch of the Mid-Texas Conference, or even at the launch of the Global Methodist Church, and thought this is where we would be sitting at the end of 2023, there's no way that I would have believed it. God has led and moved in such a way. I felt like I spent 6 years as a district superintendent, and I felt like we were pushing a boulder up a hill the whole time. And now it's like we've reached that tipping point and you can't catch the boulder as it rolls down the hill. It's like when it's God's time, you just can't stop it. We've had lots of churches join. I believe we're right at the 4,000 mark. I don't know what the number is, but it's close to 4,000 if it's not already over 4,000. We've got lots of pastors that have made the transition over. And Jeff Greenway uses the term, you don't know you're in brackish water until you're in fresh water. And I think that's really true. Our clergy in Mid-Texas, because I was a DS, I'm not afraid of the word mandatory. I don't use it often, but in the areas where I do use it, I mean business. And my folks know that. And so I made class meetings mandatory, kind of like eating your vegetables when you're sitting at the table with your kids. You're going to eat your vegetables. You can have your dessert, but you're going to eat your vegetables. And at first there was some hemming and hawing, like, we don't want to, how can you take an hour of our week every week, blah, 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 blah. And then they began doing it and they began experiencing it. And here's what I hear from pastors. I have never felt this connected to my clergy brothers and sisters.
Mhm.
I've never felt this supported. I'm not facing my church situations in my church alone anymore.
Mhm.
And I will tell you, out of over 200 pastors, I have 3 pastors who do not participate regularly in class meetings. They participate once a month or so, but I got 3. I will take those numbers any day. And really, I was mandatory at first, and now I'm like, okay, just let it be. And organically, it's just grown into something. And then what I had hoped would happen did happen. Many of those pastors have now taken it to their local church,
Mhm.
and they are having class meetings with their leadership teams, and they're infusing class meetings into their local congregations. And that fire that caused the Methodist Church to spread across England and across America, that was the source. I mean, that was a huge source of what propelled us across America, is catching fire again. And people are going from having information overload to actually experiencing transformation.
Yeah. So if somebody is just finding this video on YouTube or Facebook and they're like, well, what in the world is she talking about, this class meeting? Could you give us the kind of
Sure.
just Twitter linked version of what that is?
Okay, as long as Kevin Watson doesn't watch this video, we are good. Okay.
Yeah.
Kevin Watson is the foremost authority right now. He has written a really great book on the class meeting. Highly recommend you go to Seedbed and you buy that book. Okay. But I'm going to give you the Leah version. We spend a lot of time on Bible study. When I was a pastor, that was one of those things that we did. And it is great to study the Bible. We should be searching the scriptures. We should be seeking, but we rarely talk about our relationship with God and where we are. And so a class meeting is where a group of people covenant together to come and to share with one another how it is with their soul, what they're struggling with as far as their walk with Christ, and how they can pray for one another, how they can strengthen one another. And it is a soul friendship, a group of people who are willing to bare their souls and to grow closer to Christ. And when if any of y'all have done the 4th day stuff with Emmaus, where was discipleship denied? Where did you feel closest to God? It's very similar to that. But a little bit more in the Wesley vein. We usually use the Wesley 22. If y'all are not familiar with Wesley 22, Google it, put it somewhere where you see it every day. It will make you a better Christian. And so it's just an opportunity for people to come together and talk about their relationship with God.
Yeah, that's really a great summary. The book by Kevin Watson is just called The Class Meeting. And if you just Google The Class Meeting Kevin Watson, that'll come up. And it's set up to be like a small group to help you transition into having a class meeting. The resistance you get, maybe not so much with pastors, but with laity, is they're used to having a curriculum that they can, kind of hide behind, or like, can use as a way to keep a buffer from, like, you're not going to get into my personal stuff. But one of the Wesleyan things that was so strong was the discipleship. And so I'm very excited to hear that that's happening for you. I think we've got to be really careful what we make mandatory in a new denomination. And
Absolutely.
I think this is one of the few mandatories I'm ready to jump up and get behind and say, I see that.
Yeah, there's a lot of things people think I should have an opinion on that I don't have an opinion on, but class meetings I do have an opinion on.
Yes. That's great. So you've been in leadership, and one of the things that you've been doing is you've been putting the Global Methodist Church, and I actually saw you were on a trip, and I said, hey, I want to hear about this. I saw you took a group of Global Methodist people. So you have some partnerships, thinking about how this church can be global. Why don't you talk about what global partnerships are and what your experience has been in that area?
So we actually in Mid-Texas, part of the understanding when you become a provisional annual conference is that you will enter into an international partnership as a way of helping to support our international brothers and sisters. And last November, when we launched, we asked for a 1-year waiver because at that point we had no clue what churches we were going to have or how many churches we would have or what our budget would be like. And Daniel Topolsky serves on the Transitional Leadership Council with us. And he is the presiding elder for the Bulgarian annual conference. Bulgaria was what made us global. They were the very first annual conference to make the move to the Global Methodist Church. When they did that, they walked away from 85% of their income. And in conversations this year with Daniel, just hearing him talk and share about his area, it was becoming clear that most of their conference was going to have to become, their pastors were going to have to become bivocational because they no longer had the resources. And he and I and Bishop Webb began kind of dreaming, what would it look like for us to develop an international partnership? It is very important to the people in Bulgaria that they become financially independent, but they can't do that overnight. Bulgaria has the lowest economic level of any European in the EU. And so they're having to learn some things after being under communist rule for 40 years, and they're kind of finding their grounding. So we came up with, and actually Daniel came up with a 5-year plan with that this is their need this year. So essentially they need $120,000 a year, which pays all of their pastors' salaries. And then every year there's a sliding scale that it goes down. And as God would have it, we have 24 covenant areas. They have 24 churches. And so our covenant areas, I don't know, do y'all have circuits or districts or whatever, but we call ours covenant areas with presiding elders.
We call them, this is bad, I should know this. It's something, we have like a area presiding elders, which is like the smaller one. And then we have connectional presiding elders, maybe, that are over those areas. So we do have some type of structure
something
like
similar like that. Well, it matched up. And what we realized was that we could do $5,000 per covenant area, and we could raise that money. Mm-hmm. And so outside of the conference budget, this isn't something that we have to have and pay apportionments to or connectional funding to. I know apportionment, that's just a word we don't use, but everybody uses. Mm-hmm. Connectional funding for, it's something completely outside of the budget. These covenant areas get together and they raise the money. They agreed to raise the money to ensure that the pastors in Bulgaria are funded and that they are able to do their ministry. Now, what you have to know is, though, this is a partnership. It's not just us sending money like we've always known. The pastors in Bulgaria are invited to participate in our pastors' covenant area class meetings every week. Mm-hmm. Now, not all of them speak English well enough to want to do that, but several of them are part of their calls every single week. Mm-hmm. And they get to know one another, and they get to share ideas, and they get to be soul friends internationally. Mm-hmm. And it is beautiful. And, you know, we Americans, we can sometimes feel a little entitled, like we need all of these things, or, you know, we can't do this ministry because we don't have that. And then when they're exposed to somebody around the world that's doing not just the ministry that they're saying they can't do, but so much more with so much less, it really helps our pastors go, oh, we really can do that. Mm-hmm. Also, just theologically, getting to hear how they are doing discipleship and how they're doing their faith sharing. It's just such a rich exchange. I can't even begin to tell you. And so we've been very, vision is not that, it's for us to have deep relational partnerships, not where we just spread money over everywhere, but where we will be going in April to their annual conference. We'll be going to Bulgaria and taking a team and introducing them. In February, Daniel is coming to the United States and will be here with us, and he'll be preaching at our annual conference. We want to have a deep, abiding relationship where it's not just a check that goes somewhere, but like there's an actual synergy and an exchange, and we're truly the family of God in presence.
I think that's very neat the way y'all are doing it. Like, I know, like, most United Methodist Church annual conferences had some type of partnership with some other area, but to me, it was never clearly communicated and was not always, other than, okay, they said, I remember they said something annual conference, to have such a rich partnership of, the sending and then bring in Pastor Daniel to come share with y'all. I just think is a really cool way to
Well, and
just
to
have some
have their
depth.
pastors be a part of our class meetings. I mean, that's just huge to me.
Yeah. Yes, yes, to have people in there. And then also, there's this idea of like some people in the move have lost some of something. Even like me as a provisional elder, I was not able to roll my pension as easy as somebody who was a full elder, and I can gripe about that some other time. But compared to like a system that lost 85% of their resources, and they still are like, we get it, we know it's going to happen, but we still feel called to do this, to be the type of people God's calling us to be.
Right.
It's just like
That
it's
sacrifice that we don't get. Yeah.
yeah, it's like a punch in the gut on days when you're like, oh, woe is me, to be like, no, like,
Yeah.
it's so powerful to hear how people all over the world are stepping up in the Wesleyan movement.
Absolutely. And it is all over the world. It's beautiful to watch.
So you just got back from a trip from Costa Rica with some Global
That's right.
Methodists too. I was excited about that because I've been to Costa Rica before, so I was really excited I went on a mission trip in college, so it brought back some of those fun memories where God did some cool things in my life. But also, I'm excited about that, about your trip, and then also our convening conference in the Global Methodist Church will be there. Why don't you start out and tell us about the trip you just went on down there?
So our second international partnership is with Costa Rica. Ray and Lydia Zirkle are out of our area, the Mid Texas area, and they have received a lot of support from congregations in this area, and so it was natural for us to want to partner with the folks in Costa Rica. Um, in uh, in Costa Rica, there is not a volunteerism is not allowed. You have to pay people for their labor no matter what they do. And as a result, churches can't be built by the people there. They need help from outside groups to come and help them to build their buildings, because the church can be fined if church members are working on the church building.
That's
And,
so crazy. Well, now I know why they hired somebody with very poor construction skills, or they wanted people with very poor construction skills to come and help. And actually, part of our job was rebuilding the front of the church where another group of Americans had messed it up. So
that's right.
that's
That's right.
fascinating.
So
So
it's
their
fascinating.
system, yeah. So is that because it's got more of a
It's a
socialist country?
socialist.
Okay,
Yes, yes. And
fascinating.
so, you have to pay, if somebody does a job of some sort, you have to pay their social security or their equivalent to that, plus their health insurance. And it's too cost prohibitive for them to be able to do that. So they really do rely upon us. And since COVID, there's been a decrease in the number of groups going. And I was there in January, and I was able to speak at their annual conference. And I really just fell in love with these people. I fell in love with their pastors and with their people. And Ray and Lydia were kind enough to take me around the country and introduce me and show me several different churches. And I just kept walking upon buildings that had sat there for 5 years that are unfinished. And these are churches that are worshiping 150 in something the size of my carport.
Hmm.
They have no walls. They have nothing. Those pop-up tents you take to your kids' football games or stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they have Sunday school in.
Mm-hmm.
And they've got 35 and 40 kids coming to Sunday school in pop-up tents. It's amazing. And I kept thinking, we've got the manpower. It's not very expensive in Texas. We can fly out of Houston for $400 round trip to Costa Rica. We could start sending mission trips. And so we have a goal of sending between 12 and 15 mission groups to Costa Rica next year. It is a different kind of partnership than we have with Bulgaria. We're actually sending groups to Costa Rica on a regular basis. It's not a financial as much as it is relationship and being present with them. And so last week we took a lead team, and we had 12 people from Mid Texas go down. And we toured the country, except for the southern part. We'll do that another time. But we toured the country, and we got to see just meet some really great people. I was in prayer that my people would see the vision when they got there, and I'll be honest, the vision they saw was greater than the vision that I had seen, which is actually a good thing, right? And so, we've already got groups talking about probably almost every month next month being able to send somebody from mid-Texas to Costa Rica. So that is the partnership. Bishop Palomo down there talking about the exchange. When you listen to this man speak and how he does discipleship, I just want to get a pen and just start writing, because it is just so deep in his commitment to discipling people wherever they're at, whether it's the more elite, more professional, or it's the people that are making the journey from Nicaragua into Costa Rica. He's got a deep love and passion for that. And, it was very evident to everybody on our trip, just the depth of the faith of their leadership and of their churches and of their laity. And so it was really good. We did get to drive by the convention center where we will have our general conference next year. And that was exciting to see and kind of to have some ideas about that. And the Costa Rican church, Evangelical Methodist Church, is very excited for us to come, and they're willing to be prayer partners with us and greeters at the airports and whatever we might need. And just the way they've opened their hearts to us, it's beautiful.
That's wonderful. Yeah, the church in Costa Rica is not a part of the Global Methodist Church right now, is my understanding.
Correct.
And do you know their history? Were they ever a part of the United Methodist Church, or what?
They're an autonomous affiliated with the United Methodist Church. They became autonomous, I want to say in 68, maybe in the 70s, somewhere in there. Not sure I know the complete history. They had been United Methodist and then became autonomous.
Okay.
So
yeah, that's very interesting. So yeah, we are very grateful for all of our partners in ministry in Costa Rica, and very much looking forward to the convening conference. What are you hoping is going to happen at the convening conference?
So I heard Carolyn Moore give a really beautiful, it was at your annual conference when she was talking about Ezra and how they built the altar before they built the walls. And my deepest prayer for General Conference is, before we build the walls of the Global Methodist Church, we might collectively, as a worldwide body, come to the altar and truly seek God. I think it will be so exciting to see. I've been blessed to go to 4 different annual conferences at this point, and it's interesting that it's kind of the same everywhere you go, but yet it's very different. But the spirit is the same. And I just think to have that spirit in a worldwide place where everybody from around the world has come in, I just cannot wait for the spiritual side of that, of what it's going to feel like to be with that many brothers and sisters centered in on Christ, Orthodox Wesleyan theology. And I just really trust that God's going to do an amazing work there, whatever that looks like. So I'm not going in with legislative preset anything. I'm really not. I just want it to be God's will. I just want it to be God's way. And I'm praying that the delegates, I'm praying for the delegates that get lifted up, that they're going with this new heart of global Methodism, not bringing in the baggage of the old, but truly seeking to build the altar and seek God and not seek anything else.
Yeah. I think that's what's been really impressive. I think everybody's pretty much on the same page with that. We all want to make sure that there's not a theological fight to have. So let's just focus in on the essentials. And there was I haven't listened to the Firebrand episode, but I know Carolyn Moore was on that too, talking about something similar. So I'd forgotten you were at our annual conference.
Yes.
I I remember talking to you at New Room. But yeah, that was cool to see for a moment. And you led the opening night of worship and crushed it. I remember that was
I don't remember
you talked about Alcatraz. Yeah,
I did talk about Alcatraz. That's right.
Yeah, that was really cool. I enjoyed that very much. What about since you're a president pro tem, and you might not want to talk about this right now, since I know that there's different committees working on it, but do you know anything about elections or when they might be? Or
So we have a commission on episcopacy that is in the process of working on that. Whether we will have elections, what those elections would look like.
I'm sorry, I meant for like electing your
Oh,
delegates to go to,
for
because you're a president pro tem, and my understanding is you're going to have to get elected too. Is that
we all
correct?
have nobody
Yeah.
goes unless they're elected. That's correct.
Well, I mean, it might be somebody like me, a little peon, that goes as an observer to check it out. But
Well, yes, there will be places for observers. As far as delegate elections, that has not been standardized across the system at this point. In Mid-Texas, we're praying and working our way through what we think that will look like, because our annual awakening is February 1st through the 3rd. So we've got a task force working on that right now. We're waiting to hear allocation of delegates and things like that out of the Commission for General Conference. So we just don't have that yet.
Yeah, that's what I knew, that we were still trying to figure out either the way to do delegates or how many delegates or something like that. So I know that's something in the process, and
Right.
it'll be fascinating. As we've seen, you say we're at 3,500 churches approximately, probably close to 4,000. But there's probably been close to 7,000 or 8,000 who have disaffiliated from the United Methodist Church. So there's a lot of churches that have said, we're never going to join anything again. But there's also a lot of churches that say, we want to wait and see. If somebody's in a church that maybe in mid-Texas, maybe in North Georgia, maybe somewhere in the United States or around the world, and they're thinking, okay, well, I'm kind of waiting to see, what would you tell them is a reason to consider joining a denomination, and specifically our denomination?
So I believe if we are truly Methodist, we're truly Wesleyan, we can't be independent. I mean, we just can't. We are connectional by nature. One of the places where we declined is when we stopped having our class meetings, when we stopped having our band meetings, and we stopped having that deep connectional DNA. We got to the point where people didn't even, you say class meetings, and like you said, they have to Google it. They don't know what it means, when that was foundational. And so I just would say that you need to look at yourself and say, do we want to be independent, or do we want to be a Methodist? Because to be a Methodist means to be connectional. And I believe there is an accountability that comes for your pastors, for one another, when you are tied to a denomination, and you're able to make sure that your clergy has been vetted, and you have your theology and all of that. It's not being just filtered through one or two people, but it's going through a group of folks who are seeking God in such a way, so that, like, when there are changes that need to be made, it's done in a collective way. It's not done by a pastor or a committee in a church, but it's actually a global, more broader perspective. So
one of the things that is great about being in a denomination is that professional accountability. And one of the things that's unsettled, and I think maybe debated in the future, is, what will ordination look like, and what will the requirements be like? And I know in Texas, y'all have some very, you got Baylor, they have a very strong Wesleyan school. You got SMU. What do you think is going to happen as far as credentialing as an elder? Do you think we'll bring back an older requirement that we had, which was to have a master's of divinity? Or do you think there'll be some type of more middle ground of, hey, we still want you to have, X, Y, and Z for education, but you don't have to have this sometimes 96-hour degree to become an elder in the Global Methodist Church?
I don't know, because I don't travel in the circles that are unhappy with the situation as it is now. I will tell you that most of the pastors that I talk to are feeling very equipped with the training and the resources that they're receiving. Those that were on the Masters of Divinity track, I believe, will continue on a Masters of Divinity track. I think the average church in Mid-Texas worships 82. There is a lot of churches that worship a lot less than that. I need pastors who are practically trained, who are theologically educated, but don't necessarily always have to have a 96-hour degree, because they're going to be serving bivocationally in those small churches. And so we need to have an educational system that meets the churches that we have. There will always be churches like the church you serve that needs somebody with an MDiv. But we have to have a system that is broad enough that it represents the many churches that are coming to us that are bivocational, part-time, smaller congregations, people who understand rural America. And then our educational institutions, which I believe each one of our recommended seminaries have stepped up to do this. They have to recognize that we have to be providing practical training for these clergy because they're already serving. And how do we make sure they are equipped to serve in the local church context? So I don't see us taking a step back. I think the need for pastoral education and quality pastoral education will always be there. There might be people who work bivocational for so long and then say, oh, now I need to go get my MDiv because I feel like God is calling me to a different church. That could happen. But for me, I don't see an MDiv becoming part of the requirement for becoming an elder. I definitely would not support that.
I love my MDiv and I'm so grateful for it. But it's interesting, and I might do a longer video on this, but you know, in the United Methodist Church, it was get your MDiv, and then you've got to come to this one point where you are just perfect in your writing on theology and hopefully, you know, a very good communicator and preacher. But once you get past this point, like there was continuing ed, but there was just such this intensity at this one point to get this one thing right. And I think we're going to have to say in the GMC is no, more important than having this one time where you're, you know, 99% perfect. You've got to be a continual learner in theology and Wesleyan practicality and mission and ministry. And so I think we're going to have a shift that's going to happen to say it is going to be more like that part-time pastor who is continually learning. And then how can your conference, how can our conference, how can regional events really equip preachers to grow in their skill set and theology.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think the problem that we've had in that, even you could say, you know, the American church has had is it was never an educational problem. Maybe we could say the education could have been a little different, but it was never an amount of education. I think having that required class meeting is saying, no, it's your relationship with God and everything's got to be rooted in that. Like I had a football coach who always said, you know, prepare for the worst. Everything else will take care of yourself. I mean, you could have the, you know, 3 PhDs in biblical studies, but if you're not in a growing relationship with Christ, then you're going to be setting yourself up for some very unfulfilling times in ministry.
That's absolutely right. And I will tell you, as a district superintendent, in the United Methodist Church, I would often be frustrated because some of my very most effective pastors, those that were leading people to Christ, who were doing the outreach in their community, that were doing cutting edge stuff, were licensed local pastors, and got very little respect. And you could have somebody who had all the master's degrees and all of that stuff, who did very little other than preach a sermon on Sunday morning, and yet they were held up higher than these people who were holding down a full-time job and doing a phenomenal job pastoring their church. I just don't believe we can equate education with effectiveness. I think education is important. Obviously, I went all the way. You know, I got as far as I could get. And every now and then they're talk about that Wesleyan PhD, and I go, maybe. And then I think I don't need one more degree, but only because it's interesting to me. I think that would be pretty cool. But it's not about the degree. It's about the heart in which you pursue your ministry. And we do have to constantly be preparing. So everything's held in tension. I hope I'm not coming across as somebody anti-education, because that's not it at all. It's got to be held in tension, though, between the two.
Yeah, I think it's anti a one formal degree education. I think everybody, whether you're a professor at one of our seminaries or you're somebody in leadership, like you want educated clergy, but
That's right.
Say in a system where you go into for sometimes extreme amounts of debt, and then we in the Global Methodist Church, we don't want to move our preachers every 3 years, having to move up to a next higher salary to pay off this, they could have got
$140,000 right here.
So yeah, so there's
Yes.
versus, hey, we're going to make sure that your seminary is taken care of appropriately and help you raise the funds for it, and whatever that looks like, if it's course of study or some other types of things. But I think we want educated Wesleyan Bible intelligent people to be preaching and teaching, but that doesn't
Absolutely.
necessarily mean
100%. Yes.
that. Yeah. So well,
Yeah,
that's really cool. So what about, how are you going to recruit preachers? You have to make an appointment as a president pro tem. The Transitional Book of Doctrine as a discipline says you have the powers of a bishop in this pro tem transitional time for making appointments and administrating your conference. One of the things we're going to have to figure out is how to equip clergy, especially as we figure out what will be the requirements, and make sure that churches have quality leadership in it. What's your kind of high level thinking of how that might look over the next few years?
So I actually was in career development for 13 years before I went into ministry. And there were so many times where I thought, God, why did you leave me in placement and recruiting and all that for so long, when I really just I really should have just been in ministry. And then I sat around a cabinet table for the first time and I went, oh, I get it now, God, I get it. I believe we have to be constantly speaking into people a culture of call. If we see somebody with an anointing, we need to speak that into them. And so that has to be a culture that, as president pro tems, presiding elders, pastors, we are constantly on the lookout of witnessing. There was a season in my life where I would not want to recommend somebody for ministry because I didn't want them to have to go through some of the things I've gone through. We are actually seeing a lot of people come to ministry now because they are now seeing a freedom and a new experience and a new expression. And they're like, yeah, no, I want to be a part of that. And so it's a lot easier to recruit right now. But I think beyond recruiting, it's laying out that foundation of call, nurturing that. There are people who God has been calling for 10 and 15 years that need somebody to speak into them. I see you as a minister of the gospel. I can see that in you. And that little spur is enough to get them to go to the BOM and to say, I think I need to explore this. I need to take the next step in starting my candidacy. So for me, that is super crucial. In the Mid-Texas Conference, we had 77 churches come over without pastors. Never in my life would I have thought I would make 109 appointments in a year, in a span of 1 year. Fire hose is not even adequate, like maybe ocean just beating me, except it never stopped. We are now down, I think, to the last 2-3 of those appointments that we're trying to make. Every single time we got to the end, I would start praying to God, Lord, you got to raise somebody else up. You've got to raise somebody else up, because we've still got all of these churches to fill, and I've got nobody over here in the basket. What am I going to do? And God would raise somebody up. And so I think we have to trust in God to raise up the right person at the right time. We also have to be willing to speak a culture of call and preach on calling, preach Samuel. Preach the different stories of the Bible that shows how God uses men and women to spread the gospel, to spread the story, the greater story of the scripture.
Yeah. And that's what I hear you saying is, you're saying it's not really my job to recruit the people. It's my job to create the culture where everybody's talking about discerning your calling. And to me, that's much more freeing because it's not even me, like, as a pastor who wants to see my church grow, it's not my job to grow my church. It's to grow the people here to be the people who grow the church, because they'll have so much, the exponential effect that they'll have going out doing ministry alongside me, your preachers alongside you doing that. It's and actually, maybe this was the Holy Spirit speaking in my heart, but there's somebody I was like, oh yeah, I need to remind them, which I've told them before, that I see that anointing on them, but maybe today will be a good day to remind them at church later tonight how I see that.
So my husband and I, this is just a side note, we fostered through Methodist Children's Home here in Waco for 9 years. And we had this young man that came and he lived with us for 2.5 years. And while he lived with us, I would just look at him and I would just see the light of the Lord all over him. I mean, at the age of 7 to 9, you could just see he loved Jesus so much. And so I got an email from him this week saying, Mama Leah, God just won't leave me alone. And I know you'll understand. And I think I'm supposed to go into ministry. And I said, oh, baby, I know you are. When would you like to meet for dinner? And so you just have to speak it into people. I see the light of the Lord in you. Let God do the rest.
Well, that's so awesome. So a great emphasis for us to have. I know our time's kind of limited together, but this kind of brings me to another idea I've been thinking about as we are in this initial phase of the Global Methodist Church. You obviously, I hear you say, emphasize class meetings, pastors, and also church members to be in class meetings. Emphasize a culture of calling of everybody, and emphasize that calling into pastoral ministry. As we get started, we're kind of in this season of preaching, and we want to preach about Methodist distinctives. What do you see as, if we were to look back 5 or 10 years from now and say, hey, we're really proud our preachers have this kind of distinct emphasis. What do you think global Methodist preaching could look like over the next 5 or 10 years?
I am praying that it is biblically and doctrinally heavy. Like that you take that catechism, that beautiful gift of a catechism, and you take the scripture and you lead deeply from those places. Those are some deep wells that will transform lives and will transform churches. I believe we have had such a we've just been bankrupt in that area in some of our churches, not all of our churches, but in some of our churches. We were theologically confused. I was theologically confused. Like, should I say this? Should I not say this? Can I say Satan? Can I say hell? Can I, to be given the gift of a catechism and to be able to read that catechism and look at your sermon and say, how does this weigh against what it says we believe, against scripture, is a gift. And so my prayer is that our preaching will be biblically and Wesleyan theologically sound. We have no excuse now not to do that. We have all the tools at our resources. We don't have this pluralistic theology of, well, it could be this or it could be that. No, we know who we are as Orthodox Christians. We know what we believe. Preach it. And so if I were to look at the next 5 to 10 years, my prayer is that we would have pastors who would preach from deep, deep places.
Yeah. I think one of the things hearing you say that makes me think of, once you finish your sermon and your study of the scripture, when you get to the application illustration, hey, is there something in the catechism that I could point to as an illustration,
Yes.
as this scripture says, and this is what we kind of believe too, and here's from our catechism, and kind of go on to your application from there.
As a DS, I would always teach preaching twice a year for my new little baby preachers that were the first year, because I had a lot of smaller churches that required first year pastors. And I would always pull out the Wesleyan notes, explanatory notes. And I'd say, after you read all the other commentaries, read this one. And somebody said, well, why would you do that? And I said, because this is what it literally says we believe. We need to be seeing what Wesley has to say. Let's pull out the catechism, because that's who we say we are. Let's pull out Wesley's explanatory notes. Let's read Wesley's sermons on the same text that we've written on, if we've written on one. What is it that we say we believe about this text, and make those applications, like you were saying.
Yeah, you get bonus points every time you quote a Wesley sermon or the catechism in your message. Not because you have to do that. That's the company line, but because it's a very rich resource along with other thinkers in the Christian tradition. But Wesley is a gift that you'll even hear Reformed or Catholic preachers reference from time to time.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely.
Well, that's very cool. I'm so glad you're able to spend a moment with us and just sharing with everybody. What a blessing
to get to come and share.
Yeah, I'm always so grateful for your friendship. And if you ever need anything in the future, please feel free to reach out.
All right. Sounds great. Thanks for having me.